Well, what did you guys do for Christmas on the farm?
We
Did the Methodists have a Christmas Eve service?
well, yeah, they had a program. They call it a Christmas program every time, and all the youngsters almost in the congregation were expected to participate. There's always some that didn't, but Dad and Mom were pretty involved, and they insisted that we be in it. And so
There were enough of you kids to do the whole program among yourselves.
They had a summer program. I forget now, midsummer sometime, and then in the Christmas time, we'd go down evenings before and practice for 2 weeks, and then put on the program on Christmas Eve and before the whole congregation. Anybody in the community that came, usually was people that didn't regularly attend church, would come for that. And then in the summer, I forget what the occasion was. In the summer, they always had kind of a midsummer program too.
Oh, really?
At the church, and we'd drop our hose in the cornfield and take off down there or run down there for a couple hours practice and back pick up the hose and work till dark for 2 weeks to get the programs ready, and then they put on the program in the summer. And again, nearly everybody participated. Everybody was supposed to. Nearly everybody would participate.
So they do like plays?
They'll play. It would be a play. It was always a play of some kind, and one of the ladies in the congregation directed it with the assistance of a couple others, and it was always some kind of a little play where there was generally like a central figure or two, and then other supporting people played roles. Some people have one line, some people have no lines. They'd just be standing there holding something.
Yeah. I remember doing that when I was in school. I can remember over at Ridgedale. I was supposed to be an angel one year or something. And that's all I remember about it. I just remember I was supposed to be standing around. They had the manger thing going, and I was supposed to be an angel. And I remember because they opened up the curtain there, and it was so full of parents and all watching it. And I remember thinking that was really, really exciting to see all those people crammed into those tiny little rooms. But that's really all I remember about it. So, and then they sang a lot of traditional.
They sang little songs, and there's always some little songs went along with the plays that they put on. There'd be a kind of a theme to the play, and then the songs would support the theme and so forth. And generally, always every summer and every Christmas night. Again, I can't remember the occasion for the summer, but it was almost always a program during the summer. And Mildred remember what it was, but I can't.
Oh, I'm sure she, one way or another.
She'd tell you something one way or the other.
Well, what did you do at home? Like, did you usually have a tree, or did you?
Yeah, almost always had a tree. I don't remember exactly what was done about a tree before we were big enough. As boys got big enough to trudge out and cut one, we'd go out.
Were you able to find a tree?
We'd go someplace and cut a limb off a tree. Sometimes we'd have to take 2 or 3 limbs and kind of splice them.
Really?
We didn't have pine trees in our area per se. Around on the old creek hill, there would be 2 or 3, and it was almost impossible to find and nobody sold them at the stores. Nobody buy them. Nobody had money to buy them, and it was almost impossible to find a well-shaped tree.
Yeah.
But we'd find the best shaped one we can, and then we'd find some little old branches, and we'd wire some little old branches
Ingenuities at work.
into it and make it look like a tree.
Yeah. I didn't know that.
And of course, there were no lighted decorations, but there were always things like one popular thing that was hung on the trees then was popcorn and string it on a thread and hang it all over the tree. And then there were the little bulbs, and they were precious. Mamas protected them from one year to the next with their lives. Little bulbs that they tied or clipped onto a tree.
Well, I remember you used to make these things at
And they had icicles.
chains, these little chains.
They had the little silver icicles, and they sprinkled those all over the tree.
They used to make these little chains in school. You remember you used to make those
chains,
paper chains?
Yeah, they used
That's
those
what
they'd color the paper, you used to call it cut chains.
Glue
color
them
paper
together.
chains, yeah.
And they would use that for.
Yeah.
Did you ever do cranberries? Probably didn't come by cranberries much out there.
Yeah, nobody had any money to
Never
buy
heard of
cranberries.
cranberries.
Nobody raised them. There was no one grew
Can't
out
raise them
there.
without a bog. So.
Yeah, so nobody had cranberries, and but Yeah, we almost always had a little old tree of some kind. Us boys would go out and trudge through the fields and woods and places till we found enough pine to put one together to make us a tree.
You had to be motivated, huh?
Yeah, we'd spend the whole Saturday or Sunday afternoon a week or two before Christmas finding that tree.
They sing around the house, sing Christmas carols? Or
I mean, people in the community come around singing.
Yeah, or did you guys?
Oh, we might sing some
Sing around
around home, but not a great lot. But nobody. And the little towns, maybe the little villages, they might do a little caroling
I
without.
think she's meaning at your home.
Well, and at home we'd sing some, yeah, but not a great lot.
Did anybody play an instrument there?
And Grant and I fiddled around the guitar and banjo for a while
Oh,
after
yeah?
when we were growing up, but then we got on to other things before we got very good at it. We used to just be able to record some. Oliver taught me 2 or 3 tunes on the violin.
Oh, really?
Oliver's Oliver, yeah, played the violin for a little while. And played the piano for a little while. When I had appendicitis, only with one hand, but I sit down and learned to play several religious songs or songs that I knew. I'd sit down, Turkey in the Straw, and then several religious songs. There's a lamp burning bright in the cabin, and a window shining for me, and things like that. I could pick them out with one. I couldn't play with 2 hands, but I could pick them out with one hand and play them. But then work demanded the time and back out. It's only in the wintertime you had any time for that, and then not much, because going to school and all that stuff. Doing the chores became pretty monumental in the wintertime because our barn would only hold about a week's worth of hay for the stock we kept in it, and so every Saturday, every weekend, even when school, the barn, the hay mow had to be refilled, and it didn't make any difference what the weather was like outside. That hay mow had to be filled every Saturday, so there'd be enough feed in there for the livestock.
Where did you keep the hay?
It was out in the field in stacks.
Just like not baled or anything?
No, it was stacked in stacks.
How would you cut it? How was it cut? I mean, was
In
there a
the stack?
machine to cut it with, or did you have
No,
to size?
we just.
Pitchfork.
Oh, we cut it. You mean to harvest it? We had
Yeah.
a horse-drawn machine that had a little cutter bar that went along with this thing in here, cut it off, and then a horse-drawn rake that we'd rake it in windrows, and then we'd go along with a sled or vehicle of some kind, or a sweep rake or something, and pull that into load that, take it into where we were stacking it, and stack it, and then you stack your stacks and taper them off to shed water, and then when you went to feed it, you either fed off the top of that stack or loaded it off the top of that stack on your sled, took it in what you're going to feed in the barn, feed it and put it in the hay mow once a week. The hay mow had to be filled. Plus, that was just the little bit of stock we kept in the barn there at the house. The rest of the stock was out in the field, and we'd have to go out every day, twice a day, every day, and feed that stock with hay to the stock that was out in the field.
So how much stock did you have? What was out in the field?
We always had 2 horses, and we generally had half a dozen milk cows, and a few cattle for beef, and maybe somewhere between 35 and 55 sheep. I don't think we ever had over 60 sheep. And then we always had any place from 4 to 15 hogs, and chickens and ducks and things around. And they all had to have feed.
Yeah. So what'd you keep in the barn?
Well, and they kept the horses and the milk cows in the barn and at the house, and that's all the room we had there for them. And the other stock was the sheep. Everything was out in the range on the hill, and only when it get real bad, the snow gets so deep they couldn't get around out there. Then we'd take the horses out and make a track path to bring them back in through, and then bring them into the barn, take care of them. Not in the barn, but around the barn there where we could shovel the snow and
Like Noah's Ark?
feed them better. And it was on a limited basis, but it was what kept us alive.
Yeah.
The chickens got their own eggs and traded a few eggs for sugar now and then, things like that.
Did you all have stock on your farm? What did you do on your farm?
We had chickens.
And dairy farm part of the time.
Daddy had a dairy farm, not when I was growing up. Well, when I was real young, he didn't have a dairy farm. He had 2 grocery stores back when I was born. When I was, probably through the 2nd, 3rd grade. in Fairmont. And then he just had regular cows we milked. And when we went back, we stayed at I grew up mostly down at Grandpa and Grandma's. Williams. Pharaoh's Run, yes. We lived downstairs and Grandma and Grandpa lived upstairs. So, but then when he bought a farm out at, see, where's the first one we bought? Yeah, out there, and then we went out Route 250 out toward Barrackville. We had our first one, and then the next one we had was out on the Taylor County line.
250 south.
Out where the mall is in Fairmont. Out just behind there.
That Middletown Mall, you mean?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, out back of the Middletown Mall.
It's right in that area there. Just right.
Middletown Mall showing you, one past showing you.
Just a hop skip.
Just a little ways out there to the county line. It was out there at the county line.
Right, it was right at the county line. Most of our farm was in Taylor County, but part of it was in Marion County, so I could go to school either place. School in Fairmont. Fairmont.
Depended on who gave you better grades.
Well, that wasn't the option.
That would get through the grass.
But
well, comes on down here, 250.
Yeah. Well, we live right off 250 too. So.
Yeah. So we had but Daddy had a good sized dairy there. He had over 100 acres there, and he had a good sized herd. I don't remember how many cattle he milked, but he had electric milkers there later on. Yeah, he had electric milkers.
Pretty,
not in the beginning he didn't, but he got electric milkers. Wow. and so.
How long do they do that, you think?
Oh, see, they kept that till I was in business college. I'd graduated from high school before they sold their farm. They got wild onions, and so they couldn't sell the milk because it ruined the milk. So
you couldn't get rid of them.
No, you can sell your milk. So
no, but I mean the onions.
You can't get rid of onions. The only thing they do is multiply.
They don't you can't discourage them hardly.
You don't get less, you get more of them. You don't get less of them.
But what you probably should have done was gone in the beef cattle business and kept that farm, because that was a valuable farm. It was a beautiful farm. It lays like our farm out on Goshen Road. It had a nice house on it. It had a nice house. Daddy built a new horse barn on it while we were there.
Wow.
It had a nice.
Probably never got what it was worth to sell it.
No, I don't remember I don't know what he got for it, but I'm sure it didn't take care of his bills he had.
Yeah. Oh, what a shame.
But I was in business college when they did that, when they sold their farm. And that's when they, no, that was in, no, I was in Fairmont. I went to business college, West Virginia Business College in Fairmont. And then...
that was pretty unusual for that time too, wasn't it?
Well, it was, except I always wanted to be a secretary. Even in the yearbook, that's what it said. Yeah, I'd forgotten that. I ran on to my yearbook the other day, and when I remember my bookkeeping teacher came out, and he was working for the college and trying to get students, and he came out and talked to Daddy and Mom, and they paid the tuition, and I went to live with a family, and cleaned their house and did their chores for them. Mrs. Wyckoff was a school teacher. She was a widow, and she taught school at Miller Junior High.
Oh, really? That's the one there around the curve that you head down.
Yeah, and she had a sister that was, her sister I believe she was older. Yeah, I think she was older than what's her name, Zeppa Wyckoff was her name.
Sounds like one of the Marx brothers.
But she was a teacher. She was a teacher that everybody, like, you remember Mrs. Yadlowski? No, you didn't. You didn't have Mrs. Yadlowski. Well, your brother and other two sisters would remember Mrs. Yadlowski. I don't know. Elaine may not, because I don't. She was in 8th grade, wasn't she? 8th or 9th? 8th grade when we moved to Palatine.
I just finished 3rd grade, so she would have just finished 7th. She went into 8th grade.
Yeah, okay. She was in 8th grade, yeah. So she would have remembered Mrs. Yedlowski. When you went to junior high, you had Mrs. Yedlowski, Mrs. Wyckoff. But she had...
She was a legend around there.
She had real...
Good or bad?
Well, depending on whether you was a student or parent.
She was a good teacher, really good teacher. She traveled every year, and she
expected compliance. And got it, I think.
She believed in corporal punishment. Let's put it that way.
She'd be in jail today then.
She expected compliance and got it.
She didn't have to use it very often. The kids all heard about it before they got to her class.
That was characteristic of the teachers back when they were allowed to punish children. The teachers that expected behavior got it, and that didn't have to be constantly beating on.
You didn't have to, yeah.
You didn't have to be constantly beating on somebody. You just had to let them know where you stood.
That's right.
And the legend, they became legendary because the students coming up, they already had their reputation.
They were already afraid to cross her to find out. It was probably just rumors she started herself.
And they called her Mrs. Yardlowski, Yardlowski, because she used her yardstick, I guess. Anyway, but Mrs. Wyckoff, she was a sweet lady, but she was a disciplinarian, but she was a good teacher. And she died. She always dyed her hair. She had jet black hair, dyed, and she always went. She always went and had her hair done. Well, you could tell by looking at it, it was dyed. You know, it had that look.
And you stayed there like 2 years?
Yeah, I was there. Let's see, started in the summertime, and I stayed there the following summer. I stayed there, and I'd finished my course and stayed there, and I'd gone to work at. I'd gotten up to Craig Motor Company there, right below. It used to be.
It's right above where Rogers' office is, right up the street from where Rogers' office is.
Oh, no.
Well, it's a quarter of it's a couple, 3 blocks.
It's down there where the Greyhound bus terminal is, down that area.
Is that up, like farther up
the bank, where that big tall bank building is.
So more into town.
On Jefferson Street.
Across the bridge.
Yeah, it was on Jefferson Street, right in the middle of town. And
I thought they were up there on Fairmont Avenue.
Well, it is now, but I didn't go there then when it was there. They moved.
Oh, they moved there after you left it.
They moved out of town when I left.
When they got rid of you, they moved out of town. I thought they was always there.
No, I was right up
in town.
Craig Motor Service is right below us.
They
were right down under us. We were on the floor above. And but anyway, this man, I can't remember his name, but he was my bookkeeping teacher, and he went out to talk to them, and they decided they could pay the tuition, and so they paid the tuition, and I don't know how they paid it, but they did, and I worked for my room and board and stayed in town.
Wow.
And they kept roomers there, not boarders, just roomers. Mm-hmm. See, they had 1, 2, I think they had 5 rooms rented out. I didn't have a bedroom.
What's the difference between a roomer and a boarder?
They just have a room.
Don't eat meals.
Don't eat.
Boarder eats meals, a roomer just sleeps.
So they just had sleeping rooms.
You're saying they had roomers. I was thinking R-U-M-O-R-S. So, okay, what kind?
No.
Boarders ate in.
They had a good.
Slept in. Roomers just slept in.
She had a lady that worked at the Hartley's store. There was a clerk at the Hartley's department store, and then she had another lady worked at. She was what they call the historian. She takes the histories and keeps the histories at the Fairmont General Hospital. Mm-hmm. And then she had another lady was a teacher, and then she had a man that was worked. He was a manager for Murphy, GC Murphy Company. Hmm. So it must have been 4 rooms. I can't remember. Those 4 I remember, and Mrs. Wyckoff and her sister, Miss Furby, shared a room on the first floor. Mm-hmm. And the lady that worked for the hospital was on the first floor. And the others, there must have been 3, I think there were 4 bedrooms upstairs in the bath. Wow. There was a bath down the first floor. And so when I didn't have a bedroom, all I had was I had a rollaway, one of these sofas that you pulls out and make a bed. It was pretty comfortable, and it was in the dining room. And my little cubby hole was. I can't remember where I had my clothes. I don't know where I put my clothes because that wasn't much of a problem because I didn't have that many. and I had one of these trifold things you put in the corner, screen, yeah. And then I had a little dressing table behind that, or I could go behind there to dress if somebody was in the area, and a little dressing table back in there. That's all. That's right.
So how long were you there? 1 year, 2 years?
Oh, but it was probably almost a year, and I think I was there most of that summer. I think I was working at the Craig's after I got out of school, finished my course.
And then where did you go?
And then I went to Morgantown. By that time, Daddy and Mother sold their farm and had moved to Morgantown, and Daddy bought the Wagon Wheel restaurant out on Route 7.
That's where I first saw him, but didn't know who was singing.
Oh, really?
That's where he first met. He met me. He met his father-in-law before he met me.
We got comparing notes later on, and here, when I was driving truck for Harker's livestock truck, they operated at the Wagon Wheel restaurant up there, up near the rear. And occasionally I'd stop there and fill up with gas and get a hamburger or something on the way to Greer, on the way to Terrell with livestock.
Oh, wow.
I just, it was just some people running a place that had something I needed. I had no idea their future would come together.
You turned for that second hamburger, right?
Yeah.
I never will forget that Paul, my brother Paul, used to love those hamburgers. He ate so many hamburgers. When they sold the barbecue, they called it up there. When they moved to Akron, he started getting those hamburgers. And one day, it was before the war was starting. The war started in '41, and they moved out there. And it was
They moved to Akron, and the rumors got going around that they were using dead horses for hamburgers.
No, they said, somebody said he ordered this hamburger.
Well, yeah.
They said, you want it with or without the harness?
Oh.
He wouldn't eat any more hamburgers.
That's what the waitress said to him when they ordered a bunch of hamburgers. She said, with or without the harness. These rumors of horse meat being in hamburgers. That finished him. He was done with hamburgers.
He didn't have much of a sense of humor, huh?
Oh, he did. He had a sense of humor, all right.
He must have said it with too much of a straight face.
About that time, he decided to go into the Marines.
I think the food's better there.
I'm not sure. He had it pretty.
They'd just gone to Akron a little while, I guess, before we met.
Probably a month before we met. I'd planned to go out there with them, when they got settled in.
So you were working at the plant then?
At the DuPont. I went down there. I went down the last. I started to work there in the first day of January. Was it the last day of 1940? Last day of 1940, I went to work at the DuPont. And I worked in the secretarial pool in the engineering place, department. And
then they pulled her out of the pool and made her the project manager's secretary.
Wow.
That's where she was when I met her.
Shining light.
yeah. Didn't have any work to do down there.
And how long had you been working at DuPont then?
I met her a year.
And you were doing guard duty at
And I
night?
was on patrol force guard. Chris Tennant got me that job.
Hard for you guys to meet if she's working days and you're working nights.
Oh,
Well,
he was on the swing
We
shifts.
met through my shift was rotating, and we worked 10-hour days, 4 days a week. It was a 40-hour week work week, and we were 10-hour days, 4 days a week. And when they swore us into the Army, then they gave us 3 extra hours at the end of our last shift for the week, which made us 51 hours a
Swore you
week.
into the Army?
We were sworn into the plant.
Oh, I didn't know that.
One of the guards at one of the ordnance plants they used is where they produced munitions and stuff for the war.
Yeah.
And the guards at one of the ordnance plants had gone on strike and left the plant essentially unprotected, and they were afraid of sabotage and stuff. So immediately the Army, the ordnance plant was Army owned and operated for the Army by some company on a cost plus basis. So when that happened, then the Army, the government moved immediately to swear all ordnance plant guards across the country into the Army, so they couldn't go on strike.
Maybe, perhaps you have Army benefits coming to you, you're not aware of.
Well, so how long did that last?
It lasted until the war was over. The ordnance plant.
So for like 4 years?
Well, they brought us in. They brought us in and read the articles of war to us and everything.
Oh, I didn't know
Schwartz
that.
in the Army read the articles of war to us. If you do this, you have a court-martial with punishment being such and such or death.
Fear in you.
Sound imposing.
Yeah.
And all things.
Well, so did you get any Army benefits?
No,
then?
no, I didn't get any Army benefits.
Army requirements, but no benefits, huh?
Well, we did 3 hours Army service a week. They gave us 3 hours training a week.
Oh. How to shoulder a rifle?
Well, mostly it was how to handle Army weapons, high-powered rifles, and things.
Yeah. Well, I know they were.
Which we had in our arsenal there at the plant, but we only carried the 38th plant patrol carried 38. You didn't carry them out on duty, but the guard office had rifles also that could be used if the plant was, if anybody attacked the plant or anything. But mostly we just had our handguns.
They were going to issue those to the secretaries with the back.
Everybody was issued a handgun.
Back up.
Chris, I thanked him several times because he never got me in there and never met her. Through her roommate and our plant force receptionist, telephone operator for our plant, for our shift.
Yeah. How'd that happen?
In the process of time, she became Gene's roommate. I don't know if Gene wants me to tell the whole story here on tape or not.
No, you can omit a few things there. You don't have to tell it.
Uh-oh.
That's probably the things you want to hear.
Yeah.
Right? That's the interesting part of the story. You go ahead and tell it as far as you want to go, then I'll take over.
No, you go ahead.
Anyway, I guess I'd been standing down on the street. Now, this came out later after we got to comparing notes. I'd been standing down on the street talking to Gene Zaney's dad when it was Christmas Eve or one night, just a few days before Christmas, I guess, and this on the street there in Morgantown, and this Helen, what's her last name?
Not Helen. Thelma.
Thelma
Nelson.
Thelma Nelson walked by, and there was some girl with her, and of course I smiled, spoke to Thelma, and they walked on by, and the girl happened to be Gene. So Thelma told Gene later she's going to get her a date with that guy, which she did. But Thelma's husband had been, before they began to room together, Thelma's husband and Thelma had this room. Bookies?
Hookies.
Hookies. Okay.
Not bookies.
We'll get her. Hookies. And anyway, when her husband got called away to the service, that left Thelma with the room. They were both working there at the plant. And when they left, and so Gene's parents, he left about the time Gene's parents moved to Akron, I guess. And so Thelma said, well, your parents going, you need a room. I've got a room. I need somebody to help share the expenses. And so they moved in together. But Thelma was pregnant. And so, and she's pretty well along with her pregnancy. And here she sits in the office. Oh, Jess Feather. We walked in the door here and heard the telephone operator's desk was there, and she's right behind it. And then there was the door into the change room, where we went into our assembly room and our locker room. you clocked in here and walked through this room and into the locker room, into the assembly room. So I walked through here, and I'm a little early this particular evening, and nobody in there but Thelma, the operator, and Jess Feather sitting there in a chair. Jess has sprained his ankle, and to keep him from having a lost time accident, they were bringing him out in the cab, letting him sit there and talk to Thelma all during the shift. Well, because it made their insurance go up. They were running him out there in the cab. They talked to Thelma all during the shift, and then they run him home in the cab. This was evening shift, and
Nice work when you can get it.
I walked in, and as I walked in the room, I punched my card, stuck my card in the box, and said, Thelma said hi, and I said hi, and I started, and she says, "Isn't your name Stuart?" And I said, "Yep." "Aren't you the unmarried guard?" And I said, "Yep." By that time, I turned the corner in the next room. She says, "Come back here, I want to talk to you." And I stuck my head around the corner of that door, and looking at her, and here she sits, 8.5 months pregnant. Says, "You want a date?" All the blood in my body come up my face and ears. My face and ears was as red as your jacket. And she says, "Not with me, stupid, with my roommate."
That was worse yet.
She could see what was. I said, "I don't know about this." Well, Jess was sitting back there, and Jess knew Gene. He kept saying, "You better take it, Paul, you better take it." And I said, "Okay, I'll try it once." Here I am.
Oh, blind date, huh?
So we were working the midnight shift because we were come off the midnight shift on Thursday morning, and so Thelma arranged for the date on Thursday night at 9 o'clock at Comanche's. And 9 o'clock seemed to me like an awful time to be meeting somebody late in the evening.
Was it 9 o'clock? It wasn't that late, was it? We went to a movie afterwards.
I don't know, whatever, 8 o'clock, maybe it was 8 o'clock. Anyway, whatever it was, Thelma set up a date for us. She says, I'll bring her to Comanche's, you be there at that time. And so I went in there, sat Gene and Thelma introduced us and sat there and talked for about 10 minutes and get up and left us on our own, and here we are.
So what did you think when she said she was going to get you a date with him?
She said, "This is your last chance."
Your last chance?
She had got me a few other dates before, and they didn't work out too well.
Uh-oh.
She said, "Okay, one more time." So I knew I had to make this one work. But good women were hard to find back then. The Army had all of them. Yeah. They were all in the service. But anyway, it worked out.
So how long did you date?
About a year. Not quite a year. You proposed to him
married
about
in February.
Well, you proposed to him in December. Remember, it was in December, and then I thought we'd probably get married next summer, and kept moving it up, and we finally got agreed on February.
That sounds familiar. And here I complained, Danny only gave me 2 months to plan my wedding.
Well, that's about what we had.
What you had, yeah.
Well,
There wasn't much of a wedding anyway. Nobody could come.
Nobody had gasoline. Gasoline was rationed. Nobody had gasoline. Gene's dad got around there on the phone. He told people that lived away off, "Come, I'll furnish your gasoline tickets." But
your gasoline,
it seemed like very few people came. Hayes and Izetta fixed up their living room for the wedding, and we were married in their living room.
Wow.
The preacher's first wedding, and young preacher was his first wedding.
Just so he gets it right.
And
huh?
we picked, the bride and groom weren't supposed to see each other until after the wedding that day. I picked Gene up, and I when I picked Gene up in the car, take her up to Hayes and Izetta's, I tried to get her, let's go get the preacher and get married before we go up there. But she wouldn't hear that, so we went up and performed the vows up there.
You know, I can't even remember who over there. My daddy and my brother Paul. No, was Paul there or was it Don? Paul must have been there. It must have been before he went to the service. Yeah, because he hadn't gone to the service yet. Because that was right after they. Yeah, that's right.
There weren't many people there.
And Dale and Clooney were there.
No,
your mother didn't come. Was your mother there?
I don't remember. I don't believe.
You didn't even invite your mom.
Very few people were there. Very few people were there.
Oh,
Why wasn't your mother there?
I don't know.
I don't remember that much about it. We were there. That's about all I remember.
That's all that matters, right?
We were there. Ralph was there, and Hayes and Isetta was there.
Well, Grandma wouldn't have liked to be left out much. You probably had to pay
You
for
know
that
what?
for a
I don't know
while.
whether she. I can't. Surely we didn't know.
We'd never heard the end of that if Grandma hadn't been there.
She must have been there. Yeah, she must have been there.
But there weren't very many people. Hayes and Isetta had their living room wasn't any bigger than this room, if that big. It wasn't as big as this room.
I don't think so.
Well, weren't, oh boy, I can't remember their names now. That couple that was at your 40th anniversary
Oh,
party.
Peck's, Hubert and Ella Mae Peck.
Yeah.
No, they weren't there.
They weren't there.
Nobody from church was there. We had a small place. We couldn't invite a crowd, and I wasn't wanting a crowd anyhow.
I'll bet, yeah. I was thinking
You wouldn't have recognized your daddy back then.
Party
If you'd have been
that-
here, you wouldn't have recognized him. He was a bashful little boy.
I was thinking Mrs. Peck was saying at your anniversary party that they were at your wedding. So that's what was making me think that.
They may have been there, but I can't believe that they were.
You could count the people that were there on your 10 fingers because that room was small.
And then you didn't set up housekeeping together for another year.
No, well,
after that,
see,
right?
Carl had Carl gone then? That was just about the time he left, either just before.
I believe he'd already gone to
But
the
Rose
service.
and
Pauline were
Pauline still home, and Mom, and I was providing a home for them, and I didn't think it fair to use the house that they've been running all this time, and to bring Jean in there as her house, and that you know, it'd be awkward for her. It'd be much more awkward for her than it would for them because they'd been running the house for a while, and they certainly weren't about to give that up, and so we didn't
Big
even.
enough house for 4 women.
So I still did what I had to do, and I spent 3 to 5 nights a week in town, and the rest of the farm. And if I stayed in town, I had to be on the road at 4 o'clock in the morning to get back out the farm to get the work done and then do whatever else I was going to do. I worked on the farm and off the farm some. So in the process, we waited till we kept that up until we was able to make arrangements for Mom to move into a house in Westover. Mom and Pauline and Rose into a house in Westover, so that Jean could come into the house and be the only lady there, not move into a house that had been being run by 3 other women for a period of time. And it was a little inconvenient, but it probably saved a lot of heartache in the long run on account of it. It just wouldn't have
You
worked.
get off on the wrong foot at the
Well,
beginning, it's hard to make
it'd
up
have been
for that.
intimidating to her,
Yeah.
and it just, she wouldn't have felt like doing anything she wanted to do, and they wouldn't have felt like letting her do anything she
Yeah.
wanted to do. So,
Yeah, that's a hard decision to make at the beginning, but yeah, if you get off on the wrong foot like that, it's a
Didn't
lot
look-
of
it
families that
didn't look
carry
like it.
grudges around for the rest of their lives because of something like that.
didn't look like a very good arrangement. That wasn't a good arrangement, but probably better than the alternative.
Yeah,
So I'd been, since 1935, I'd had the responsibility for the family, and I couldn't just chuck them out and
yeah.
say goodbye.
So where did they were renting a house in Westover then?
Yeah, well, among other things, Mom shut some people in Morgan, some college students and some working people that had rooms but didn't have a place to eat, so she fed them. They came to our house to eat. I don't know if she just fed them dinner, didn't she?
An evening, evening meal,
their
I
evening
think.
meal. She provided an evening meal for them every evening and for a price, so that helped pay the rent. Of course, rent wasn't then like it is now. And Earl was giving her $30 a month, and we was helping some.
And he was sending her a check for $50 a month, wasn't it?
Well, at a point he raised it to 50.
Oh, did he?
Initially it was only 30.
Oh, well, maybe
At
so.
a point
I don't know.
later on, then he got when he got advanced enough that he began to get. See, when he went into the Navy, he was only making $30 a month.
Well, so how'd he get into to be an officer then?
Came up through the ranks.
He just came up through the ranks. He went as high as an enlisted man could go. See, he enlisted right out of high school, and he went as high as an enlisted man could go, which was
Warrant.
warrant officer, first class or whatever. And when the war was over, they passed a measure. 'Cause an enlisted man couldn't go iron at that time, but they passed a measure when the war was over that enlisted men that had been in 20 years could take an examination, a test, and if they passed that test with certain honors, they could then go into the officer rank at the lowest officer scale, the lowest officer ranking. And so he told me when they passed that ruling, and he told me, he said, I'm going for the test. I'm 20 years here.
What do you have to lose?
I'm going for the test, and if I don't pass the test, I'm getting out, taking the benefits, the pension accrued, and find me a job. But if I pass the test, then I'm going to become an officer and stay in the Navy for another 10 years till 30 years. At 20 years, they got half their salary as a pension. At 30 years, they got 3/4. I think that's the way it worked. But anyway, he took the test and became an officer and worked his way up to lieutenant
Commander.
Lieutenant commander before he retired. And in the next 10 years, worked his way up to lieutenant commander. And then he retired. They hired him back to do the same job as a civilian. Getting his retirement, they hired him back to do the same job as a civilian. And
making more money.
He talked about us poor stewards, and I said, I won't trade places with you, but I'll trade income with you. His and Paulette of the Navy romance, they met while he was in the Navy someplace. She was stationed, she was in the, was a WAC or something, wasn't she?
Washington, D.C. No, she was, no, not a WAC. She was a
Wave?
Navy, Marine.
Marine.
That just conjures up such a picture in my mind. Well, and didn't you say she was the military police? She was like with the MP type.
I don't know.
I don't know what she did.
I don't know what she did.
I don't know what she did in there, but what they call the Lady Marines? What they call the Lady Marines?
I don't know. The Navy, it was waves. I don't know.
Waves, and the Army was wax, but I forget what they call them. Maybe they're just Marines.
Anyway, they met when he was. They were both stationed in Washington.
Lady Marine.
Their children were born in Japan.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Both of them were over there. How long were they over there?
4 or 5 years, weren't they? 4 years, maybe.
3 years.
Interesting to talk to them about what their impressions were, because Japan was very different. That they were there in the 50s then, when there was still a lot of reconstruction going on.
Yeah.
And the economy.
Yeah, right after the war, that was when they were over there.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to them about that sometime, get their impressions. I'd like to go up there and see how they're doing.
They brought a lot of pretty things back from Japan when they were over there.
I remember in Grandma's trailer, she always had a lot of little doodads, little souvenir things from.
Yeah, they wanted to do something. Over there in Japan, they wanted to do something for us for Christmas, and they sent us all those Hindu or Japanese gods.
Buddhist.
Whole shelf full of them. And their intent was good, but it wasn't what we'd have rather had by any means.
I'd rather have that rattan living room suit they brought back.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? You've seen it, haven't you seen it? They use it out in their.
Oh, well, I probably saw it once. I was at their new house. They'd only been there like a year or so.
Well, they have it in their.
I was pregnant with Taylor, and we went to New York. We stopped at.
They had it. They have it in their room they built on.
Well, when I was a little boy, Dad had a 1918, 1919, or right in that time, Model T Ford.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
They had a great big old tall, what they call 30 by 3 and a half tires on them. 30 by 3 on the front, 30 by 3 and a half. Looked like bicycle tires on the front of them. And you get, your railroad crossings, a lot of your road and railroad crossings were like this. Mm-hmm. And then you get little mud roads, and you get mud in your wheels and everything. You start across those things, and the little rut in here a little hole in here where the train wheel run in to keep it from jumping the track. That 33 front wheel tire would go down in there. It would squeeze down in there and then expand out below it, and you couldn't get it out. The only way you could get that thing out of there once you got one in there was to let all the air out of the tire, get the jack in there, and jack it and pull that back up, and then pump it back up with the old hand pump. And then when you got stuck, it was always in the rain because that's when the road was muddy. And
you try not to let it happen more than once.
And of course, we lived on a mud road, and by December the roads were getting December the roads were getting so rutted that you couldn't drive on them anyway with a car anymore. So never bought license before April because you could buy a license for a full year, for 3/4 of a year, for half a year, or for 1/4 of a year.
Oh, really?
I know for half a year you could buy them 1st January, the 1st of April, and the 1st of June or 1st of July. And a lot of time we wouldn't get them the 1st of July because of the money. And of course, at that time the roads would be graded up and be fairly good for a dirt road. But then we never bought license for the January through March period because you couldn't drive the car on the roads. When any place to go but leave it sit in the shed anyway.
When did you first need a license? Did you need a license for the
I
first
don't remember.
car? Did you need a license for the
To drive it? I don't know whether Dad had a driver's license or not. By the time I got there, you had to have a driver's license. But way back there, you didn't. But I don't know whether he needed it when he was driving or not. But anyway, I drove the Model T Ford a few times, as a little lad. Crank it on a cold morning. You have to jack the back wheel up, and it acted as they didn't have any flywheel on them, and you had to jack that back wheel up, and it acted as a balance like the flywheel. And you had to choke them and all that stuff. And they ran on a magneto that didn't have any batteries, so you had to get that crank going enough to get that magneto generating enough electricity to make them spark, and the spark would be weak, and therefore in the cold morning hard to start. And gasoline was just refined from crude oil. It wasn't treated and has the volatility that it does now. So anyway, we got along with that, and then finally we put a hot shot battery in it to make the spark strong. You use it for starting, and then switch it back over onto magneto to run. It was just a little old 6-volt dry cell battery, but it'd throw a hot spark. And when you put that hot shot battery in there, sometimes when you shut it down, it'd be near enough if one of the pistons stopped just past top dead center. You know what I'm talking about. And as soon as you turned that key on, that thing would start. You wouldn't have to crank it. It'd start because it's got a charge of. It's only been a few minutes since you shut it down. It's got a charge of electricity. The piston's just below top dead center. It hasn't fired yet. Turn that thing on and zing, she'd take right off. We liked that, didn't have to crank it. But the first car that we had, Grant and I bought a Model A Ford, 1929 Model A Ford. And I got that in my memoirs. I forget what year it was. We bought it in there, probably about 38, along there someplace. 2750. It was beat up. It had been used, and but it ran. And we had that thing for. Well, Earl got his license, and so Grant and Earl now all had license, and if any one of us was out in the car by himself, anybody was out in the car, and there's anybody at home, whoever was at home was waiting for it when it came back. And now Grant and Earl could go anywhere circumstances led them in that thing, but I never, anytime I ever was going to go someplace in the car, Mom was ready to go. And it was always an insult to her if I left without her. But they could go. She didn't expect to go with them because she knew they weren't going to ask her, but she wanted to go. She always did like to go, and that was always one of the easiest ways to insult her. I want to get in the car and take off without asking her to go along.
Made it kind of hard to go on a date, didn't it?
Yeah, but anyway, we used that thing, and finally winter came, and Grant broke his arm, upset it and broke his arm. And 3 or 4 places knocked the thing off here. He had to go to Waynesburg to the doctor. And they was going to Waynesburg for treatment. So it was a cold day. It was down around 0 and windy, and he started that thing up. But we didn't have antifreeze in it. We poured water in it. We run it to where it was going. We drained the water. Like usually to make sure it didn't freeze, we'd drain the water about a quarter of a mile before we got home. We'd drain the water, open the water plug, and then the water would be out and the engine would be warm, and that'd dry it out so nothing would freeze in it. And it helped dry the radiator out too. Then in the morning we just shut the plug and fill it up with water and take off again. And anyway, he filled it up and drove it down to Varner's and let it sit. He got one of the boys to go with him to the doctor and let it sit there long enough to freeze up, started it up and drove it to Blacksville. And he got to Blacksville, it was all froze up solid and steaming like crazy. And he found a blanket there, threw a blanket over and let it sit there and run until it thawed out. And of course, when it thawed out, by the time it thawed out, it was boiled empty. And then he grabbed a bucket of cold water and poured cold water in that hot engine, cracked the engine head and 3 pistons. Well, we just a few days after that, we was going down to Pinterest, I think, to church one night, and we got about halfway down there and heard some pop, big old loud noise, and something rattled like crazy in that engine. We had no idea what it was. We didn't. That was our first experience with engines, and we drove it on to Pinterest and back, and then drove it to Blacksville the next day. Here the piston had disintegrated, and the wrist pin on the end of that connecting rod was slapping up and down inside that cylinder rod, making all the noise. So, well, we didn't know it. We took it to Ralph Husk, and we drove it up there 2 or 3 times. And it's cold weather, and he didn't want to go out. He said he was busy. He was just standing by the fire, and he knew we didn't have any money, but we'd have found money to pay him some way. But anyway, he wouldn't work on it. So one of those 0 days, I got down there and I put on my longies and a pair of coveralls and stuff, and I was bundled up to get under that thing. And so I first took the head off, saw what was wrong, and then I had to take the pan off, and I got that thing apart and took the old connecting rod out and took it to Blacksville. Whistle Tenant had a junkyard up there, and I told him, here's what happened to my Model A, and he had pistons hanging there in the wall. He got one down, charged me 75 cents for it. I took it home, put it in, got it back together and got it running. And we made 2 or 3 trips to Pinterest and back, and the second one blew up. And so I did the same thing over again. And about 3 weeks later, the third one blew up. I went up and got another.
Since you boys are hard on the pistons.
Got another. Well, what happened? When he poured that water, it cracked the head and cracked each one of these pistons, and they were just breaking one at a time. When that third one blew up, I said, "That's enough of this." And grabbed one off Whistle's wall, put in there, and took that thing to Morgantown and traded it off. Traded it for.
And you've been sorry ever since.
Yeah, traded to see what that was about the time Grant left to go to work in
Indiana. Indiana or something.
Indiana. Earl went to the Navy, and I took that thing down and traded it off for a 34 Chevy.
Plymouth, your Plymouth? Was
I had
that the Plymouth?
I had a Plymouth in that process of time there somewhere.
The Plymouth's the one you
Yeah, I got the
wrecked on the walnut tree.
Yeah, I got the Plymouth first, anyway, I traded it off. I think I paid $125 for the next car. Put it on payments, about $5 or $10 a month. What I couldn't pay down, put it on payments about $5 or $10 a month. Then, in the process of time, I had that Model A. And I had a 34 Chevy, upset it one night, Hayes and Izetta, and I forget who the girl was with me. Run away from Morgantown to Fairmont. Out there at Smithtown, the old 73 on that Blacktop Road had what they called these V tread recaps on that thing, and on a cold, wet, rainy road, those things just formed skids for that thing to slide on. I got in that turn, and that thing went sideways and went up against that bank and upset. I thought it had rolled over sideways. And after the noise stopped, I asked everybody if there's, I called everybody by name, and I asked if everybody spoke to me. And I asked them if they was hurt, and nobody said, everybody said no, nothing more than a bruise or two. And so I managed to get my window open and got out, crawled out through the window, and managed to top down in a few inches, and was laying on its top. And
Oh my.
and raining, and I thought I was talking to them. I was going to get them out of the back seat, and I'd gotten the girl out of the front seat, going around the other side, and got her out through the window on the front seat. And so I was going to get Hayes, and I was headed out of the back seat. And I reached in what I thought was rolling down the window of the back seat, and here's opening that little wing ventilator in front, because the car hadn't rolled over sideways; it had upended back like, and it hit that ditch up that bank and fell back in the road like that. And I thought it'd roll over sideways. I tell you, when you start rolling, you don't know where you're going. Anyway, finally got everybody out of there and went across, saw a light in the window across the street, and went over and asked that woman if we could use the phone to call a wrecker. And she said, I don't have, the only phone I've got's upstairs in my daughter's bedroom, and she's asleep, and I'm not going to wake her. So I got back out of the road in a few minutes, some cars come along. Of course, nobody had a phone. And some guy says, I believe we can set that thing back up. By that time, there was about 6 or 8 good-sized men around there. And we were latched onto the thing and set it back up. We didn't go on to Fairmont. We drove back to Morgantown, let those girls off, and Hayes and I drove back to Blacksville. We didn't have any windshield in it, and it was raining, but we drove.
Oh no.
Were Hayes and I then married at that time?
No, that was before they was married.
Oh.
And anyway, we found another body, found another car that had been wrecked, but the body hadn't been touched, hadn't been hurt a bit, over at Fairview in the junkyard. So I borrowed a truck, went over and got that body and brought it over to Blacksville, put it on took the old body off, put the new one on, and then traded the car. Traded that car. Then it was processed. Model T, the Model A, the Model, or the 34 Chevy, the 37 Plymouth, and then we bought a 38 Chevy. We had 38 Chevy when we got married.
You had the
That's when I wrecked the Plymouth. I went to sleep, ran that about 50 mile an hour, and ran that Plymouth head on into a walnut tree.
No.
Broke a couple ribs and skinned up a leg and broke my nose. And I guess that's about the worst damage this time.
Oh.
Except totaled the car. And he hit this walnut tree head on 50 mile an hour. It's pretty hard on an old car. But anyway,
Nobody had insurance.
nobody had insurance. So then I went to Fairmont and bought that 38 Chevy. It was in pretty good looking shape. Pretty good shape. And then after we got married, old Gans Ridgway painted it. We couldn't get another car then. And old Gans Ridgway painted it green. He painted it pea green. We stood out like it was. It had to have paint. It started rusting pretty bad. Old Gans agreed to paint it, and I forgot to ask him what kind of paint he's going to use. When I got her back, she was pea green. Anyway,
That's your dad. He doesn't ask too many questions.
We've had 225,000 miles on that thing, and,
Oh my.
and we bought this. Let's see. Yeah, we still had that when we bought the truck, didn't we?
That's what we traded for the truck.
Yeah. No, we traded the Jeep for the truck. No, we traded the truck for the Jeep.
Yeah.
Anyway, we took that. Grant was out driving it one night. No, we were driving. We were going back to Mooresville one night, and went down through Riverside and put the brake on for the railroad crossing, and it worked. Got down in Granville, and somebody pulled out in front of us and went for the brake, and it didn't have one. We drove on home that night without a brake, and brought the milk back in the next day. Took the car down to Grow? Jackson
Grow, yeah.
Welding place down there, and told them the frame was broken clear in two. It was an old E-Action car, and the frame had been broken to on the left side for some time, and that night it broke completely in two and let the frame down. On the right side, all that was holding it, the top flange was broken, the sides were broken, all that was holding was a little bit of a lip on the bottom, about that much, all that was holding the front end of that car. So I took it over there and told him on and pull that up there and put a plate on it and weld it. And he started giving me a lot of static. I said, look, your business is welding. Tell me you won't, but don't tell me you can't. So he finally got out there and welded it up for me. We drove it a little bit longer. And Grant had it out one night, and after Mom moved in there, Westover, Grant had it out. And next morning, it was sitting down there below the house, the wheels like this, front cross member had broken.
Oh.
We went over there and got a truck. I believe maybe it was a school board truck. I don't know. We went over and got a truck and pulled the front end of it up with the chain and tied it up as high as we could get it. And tires just, tires just barely touching the ground, and we towed it back down there and had them to weld that back up. And then that's when we bought the truck. We didn't trade the car, we bought the truck. And this guy said, there's a guy who worked here with me, and he said, what do you take for that Chevy? And I said, it had 225,000 miles on it, frame broken and two, and the cross member broken and a lot of stuff. And I said, you know, I hate to price it to anybody. As old as it is, as high as the mileage is on them. He said, I'll give you $250 for it. And I said, sold.
Oh my.
So he said, well, here's $50, keep you from changing your mind. And so we let him have it. We used that truck for a year. And in the process of that year, I began artificial insemination. I was having to go into farmhouses regardless of the weather. And some places I was getting into with the truck was hard to get back out of. And I needed something cheaper to drive than the truck. It was the only transportation we had. And driving back and forth to Morgan, it was a ton-and-a-half Ford truck. We run the dairy farm. And
What year was that?
it was a 47. The truck was a 47.